Even with this drive to eventually go into business, there were moments where music really compelled me. And then I constantly did kind of these boot camp-esque programs, and it was major Soviet culture. So I would just say I was indoctrinated into the Soviet way of playing classical music, which was just intense in all ways. So a lot of competitions, started winning competitions. Cello, quite literally, led to a career in sports marketing at, arguably one of the best sports marketing companies that exists.
Justin Abrams, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you.
John Henry Crawford, it's great to be here.
You have had such an interesting career trajectory from your early beginnings as a musician in New York City to working for a corporate company, a big brand, to your own startup. And I'm really excited for people to hear today your story, because I think it's inspiring for musicians and for entrepreneurs alike. And we can learn a lot from all the different stages of what you've gone through. So would you start off by just sharing your early musical life and what that looked like here in New York City?
Yeah. So I grew up at Lincoln Center, which is the mecca of classical music in New York, and one could maybe say the country. So I'd say I was definitely born in the right place for classical music. And my parents started me at 2.5. I had a retrofitted viola with an end pin as my first cello, and I was playing in diapers to start at Suzuki School for Strings, which is a method where they start off by teaching you by ear. So I didn't need to read music at 2.5 years old. And I'd say my parents were definitely on the stricter side. And so, what could have been a casual hobby was something that was much more than that. And so I wouldn't say I took cello so seriously from kind of my early years, but it was definitely a big part of my life. And my parents were pushing me to practice, and I was during the weekends, I was in classes all day. And so it very quickly became a love-hate relationship, because, at such a young age, when your kids are outside playing, your friends are playing soccer outside, it's not the most exciting place to be. And friends outside of music school that I was going to school with every single day really couldn't relate or couldn't care less about what I was doing there. And so I wasn't as engaged to start.
Did it help having, because I know you have a brother who plays double bass. We've actually, fun fact for the audience is we've actually performed together several times. And the first time we met was at Meadowmount. How old were you when you went to Meadowmount?
Meadowmount, I think, was going into, what were we seniors in high school?
I went many times. So me, I don't remember exactly which year.
Actually, so the Meadowmount story is interesting. Believe I was a senior in high school or junior in high school, and it was a little bit by chance. What happened was I was at a music program within the Lucy Music School, which is a block away from where we are right now. And we were supposed to perform the Beethoven Triple Concerto. And it was part of this commission with this orchestra from France. And now I have the year, it was right around the '08 crisis. And so that canceled, that concert became canceled. And so I had devoted the entire summer to preparing for this big performance, performing at the end of the year or in the fall. And my music director felt really bad for the musicians involved, is, cello, piano, violin. And so she came to us and said, if there's any program that you want to get into, this summer, I'll make sure it happens. And I'd heard about the legendary Hans Jensen, who you and I both studied with, and he didn't disappoint. And I went to Meadowmount, and that's where we got to meet. And for everybody listening, John Henry was probably my favorite pure cellist.
Oh, no, you're very kind to say that. Very kind to say that. I do remember you played, is it Lalo in a class at Meadowmount?
Yeah. Again, it lines up with my college audition, so that's right.
Okay.
Good memory there too.
Yeah, I remember a good performance. But getting back to your family and music, your brother plays an instrument. So did you feel any kind of like camaraderie with him? If your friends weren't playing instruments, was there kind of camaraderie there where you both had something in common?
It's interesting. Now, most of my performances are with my brother. He plays bass. I'm on cello. We perform now at venues like Madison Square Garden. We just played at Weill Recital Hall within Carnegie Hall last month. And it's a huge part of my musical life right now is performing with my brother. But him playing music had zero impact on me at a younger age. And actually my playing music had a negative impact on him at a younger age, which is why he switched from cello to bass. He played cello until probably 11 or 12 years old, and then was constantly, in my shadow maybe, and didn't like that. And so he ended up learning bass very, very, very quickly. I think within a year on the instrument, switching from cello to bass, he got into Juilliard.
No way.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
This was pre-college, or this
pre-college?
Is pre-college. Yeah. Wow.
And then he ended up going to conservatory. So he studied with Eugene Levinson, who's the principal of the New York Philharmonic, on bass. And, had a pivotal moment, which we'll get into like I did, where it's, do you go into conservatory and arguably what the real deal is for studying, or do you go to university? And actually the teacher that we were just talking about from Meadowmount is a university teacher.
That's true.
So you can have the best of both worlds. And so that's what my brother and I were looking for. That's what we ended up landing on.
Wow. And in terms of music and your family, like your parents, could you talk about that? I mean, you said your dad had some musical kind of interest or musical background. What was that? Did that come from him originally? Because that's how it happened in my family.
Exactly. My mom's side, it was actually nothing. And then later in life, I realized that her cousin, which she has 50 of.
50 cousins.
She has 50 cousins. She's from Iran. Great deal of cousins. One of her cousins is quite a famous modern composer that teaches at Curtis. I don't know if you ever came across a guy named Richard Daniel Poor.
Of course, yeah.
So that's my mom's first cousin.
Some of his music and in the Curtis Orchestra. Yeah.
Nice. He sent me a piece of chamber music that he wrote that we should look at and play together.
Okay. What's it for? Is it for quartet or?
I forget the ensemble.
Okay.
I forget the ensemble, but we could do some fun arrangements if we want to get two cellos in there. So, but that I didn't realize that wasn't a part of, our life growing up. I only realized this, when we were teens. I think he had an affiliation with UCLA where Ramin ended up going as well. But no, it was really my dad's side. So my dad's mother, who I never got to meet, she passed away before I was born, was a very serious violist, and I think attended Mannes. But she was a very prominent female violist. She went to Tanglewood, I believe, as well, and played under Bernstein. Pretty sure Tanglewood, definitely Interlochen, but played under Bernstein. And we had, I think, like pieces of music that were autographed from Ravel, and my dad had a lot of these really cool memories that he'd share. And I ended up playing in an orchestra with my dad, a community orchestra in New York that he was a part of. And my small music program here at Lucy Moses School didn't have an orchestra.
Okay.
So in high school, I ended up joining an orchestra that he was a part of. So he's on bassoon. And in the violin section was a guy that played with my grandmother, I think at Tanglewood. So that was pretty special. But so she was a serious violist. My dad played bassoon. I think he started on clarinet, and what happened was Vietnam was still going on when he was quite young playing clarinet, and my grandmother figured if she switched him to bassoon, it'd be a more rare instrument, and he'd have a higher chance of getting drafted to the band and not have to go into the front lines of an army.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so that's why he plays bassoon.
Do you think, was that accurate?
I think the war ended before he would have gotten drafted.
Oh yeah, okay.
But I think there are definitely a lot of perks to playing bassoon.
For sure.
You can punch above your weight. I mean, he's actually solid player. Very, very consistent. He's a dream person to have in your orchestra. He'll make every rehearsal, be there early, leave late, help with the chairs. So he's really, really great to have in your orchestra. But no, he's a solid bassoon player, and we now still perform with him once in a while in orchestras. So my brother in the bass section, in the cello section, and he's playing bassoon.
So after Lucy Moses School, after high school, you started exploring this idea of going to school for music versus other things. What did that look like from you? I mean, how sure were you about what you wanted to do, like when you were applying to schools? Did you know, I want to do this, I'm not sure? I mean, were you hedging your bets at all with what schools you were trying to, or were you fully committed to one thing?
So there was never a long period of time where I ever thought to myself I wanted to be a professional musician. I think my mom, immigrant from Iran, came very, very practical person. I think when she came here right before the Shah fell, a career in engineering was the most stable thing you could possibly do. And it was the best way to lay a foundation and build a future as an immigrant. And so my mom ended up becoming an engineer and then did the next most stable thing, which was Wall Street when that became popular throughout the 80s, late 80s. I think her first day was the 87 crash. And I think I'd just always been more drawn to business. I had a distant family member that was, very successful entrepreneur, and that was inspiring to me. And that path felt accessible to me. And so never had plans to become a professional musician, although there were a couple times, I was playing very, very most serious period of my playing career was throughout high school. And then obviously, when I went on to conservatory at McGill.
Well, and Meadowmount is no place to just go and, I mean, it's not a place people go just to sort of, chill out and have fun and play music. It's like it's like boot camp for musicians. If anyone hasn't heard of Meadowmount, it's basically a 5-week training grounds for musicians where it's mandatory to practice for 5 hours a day. I think 8:30 to 12:30 in the morning. And then there's another hour from 5 to 6 p.m. And it's an old school. It was founded by Ivan Galamian. And it was where he would take his students in the summer. But it was never a place that, you would just go to sort of like go to band camp, right? It's different from that. It's like a serious training ground. So the fact that you went there is a testament to how serious you were at that point in time, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'd say I really kicked into gear. I ended up studying with this great teacher named Vladimir Panchiliv from Ukraine. In 5th grade, everything changed. I went from, I had a wonderful teacher when I was at School for Strings and doing Suzuki, but when I started, to study with this guy, things became very, very, very serious, religiously serious. When it came to, all things music.
Was that like a system? I know a lot of teachers will have like a system you follow, or was it more like just intensely high standards?
I would say, the teacher that you and I studied with at Meadowmount was more system oriented. I mean, he published a book. I don't think Vladimir would ever, publish a book. But, there was just a total intense, there's so much intensity, 1 or 2 years into studying with him, I was on a plane to Kiev, and I spent, half my summer in Kiev.
That's crazy.
Where my dad locked me in a practice room. And then I constantly did kind of these boot camp-esque programs, and it was major Soviet culture. So I would just say I was indoctrinated into the Soviet way of playing classical music, which was just intense in all ways. So a lot of competitions, started winning competitions, and that just fueled more.
And you get into that kind of feedback loop where you you're good at something and you have evidence of it, and then you want to do more of it.
Yeah. And actually, so that's when I did have a couple blips of really thinking like, am I going to be a professional musician? You and I have chatted about this before, but there are a couple moments in the practice room and performances and auditions where something just clicks. I was just at a screening of Whiplash.
Oh, really?
Last night that my friend hosted. And the end scene in Carnegie Hall, everything slows down and there's this blackout moment. And it actually does a phenomenal job of conveying exactly what those euphoric moments that you have in music look and feel and sound like. And so, I've had many of those to varying degrees, but there were a couple times where, I produced something and it just felt like that's the first time this has ever been sounded, existed in this world. And I can't just let that go. There are just a couple of those moments that really make you feel like you need to do this. You're compelled to do this. This is your life's work. Yeah. And this is coming from somebody who was like, doing, Wall Street business summer camp programs on the back half of the summer when I wasn't in music camp. Yeah.
Wow. So after Meadowmount, you would go to
Wall
Street.
That summer I did a program called Youth About Business, which is a phenomenal organization.
Youth About Business.
Youth About Business. Yeah. So it started at Columbia, or I think it started at Vanderbilt's business school, but the camp I did was at Columbia University. Instead of professors, because they're not there during the summer, it's mock mergers and acquisitions. You have a team of people. You have CEO, CFO, COO, and you're doing this mock merger or acquisition. And instead of professors, you have executives from Wall Street donating their time.
Wow.
So I had an investment banker working for me from JP Morgan Chase. I had lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell. I had, accountants from Deutsche Bank or Deloitte. And it was just an incredible. So you learn about exactly how to read balance sheets and understand cash flow and EBITDA.
At what age?
In high school. I'm in high school. In the last 2 years of high school, I did this. In the last 2 years of high school, I also did Meadowmount and one other, music program, boot camp style. So yeah, even with this drive to eventually go into business, there were moments where music really compelled me. And I probably would have done something more along the lines of like a two-cello-esque career.
Okay.
Right? Something less traditional, not, one single, classical route, or
maybe with your brother?
Probably with my brother.
Because you've played, I've seen you've played in giant stadiums and you look like you're having a blast. I don't think I've actually seen, maybe you show me on your phone like a little video clip of it, but
you got to come next time.
Yeah.
You'll be my plus one.
Love to see. Well, that's okay. Wow. I didn't know that about you. And so you did end up going to McGill and you majored in music.
Yeah, that's an interesting story as well. So I skipped my McGill music audition because I didn't think I was going to go there. I didn't visit. I applied to like 14 or 15 schools. I applied to a mix of conservatories. And so was it hedging my bets, or was it kind of, if I was going to study music full time, I saw a path to studying music full time and then going into business and actually standing out by having a music degree. So it didn't necessarily matter whether I got it from Juilliard or if I got it from Northwestern or McGill. But I was in a lesson, you take lessons with teachers as you're applying to the schools to get to know them. You won't get in if the teacher doesn't know you, or unless it's just like a fluke. You like have to have a relationship with these people. And so I'm in one of my lessons and I end up having a lesson with the cellist, Richard Aaron, who teaches at Juilliard. He also teaches at Michigan. So I played, went through it. My lala was in great shape at that point. And then we ended up talking about everything else that, is interesting in life and that I was interested in. And he goes, "What the heck are you doing applying to conservatory?" He's like, "Come to Michigan." He's like, "People are going to economics classes and then coming back and taking lessons, and they're great cellists and it's a great curriculum. Like, what are you doing?" And after that conversation, I was more, I think, inclined to go to university. But I just happened to, I live 2 blocks from Juilliard. So I went to my Juilliard audition, didn't go to my McGill audition. And then I put together that Matt Heimovitz is this phenomenal cellist, studied with, he was like Leonard Rose's prodigy, was, main teacher at McGill. And he was also, he's like winning Grammys for classical crossover, right? So the career that I wanted to have in music was probably most closely aligned with this particular cellist.
Yeah.
So that combined with, I'd visited some schools that weren't in urban locations, and I realized that I was ready to get out of New York, but I needed to be in a city. And then McGill was just like bullseye. You had this cellist who aligned with my, musical aspirations and whatever form they take later in life. You had this internationally recognized university, and you had this amazing city in Montreal. And so I ended up that music director who helped me after Beethoven Triple fell through and got me to Meadowmount. Same thing. He happened to be touring. His mother, I think Matt Heimovitz's mother, was an administrator at the Lucy Moses School. And so I think this is a story. He did he performed in a gala to benefit that school and that program. And my music director at the time, Jenny Underkoffler, got me in to that gala. And I'm sitting in the front row watching him. And I'd sent him like 20 emails at this point. Like,
20 emails.
I said, "Matt, sorry, I missed the audition. Like, I think I want to go to McGill. Can you just make time for me?" And I don't know if I was sending it to a bad email or,
I see. Okay.
Or if, he, too late.
Sure.
So I go up to him after the performance. It seemed like he'd gotten my emails and now had to confront me. And I just said, "Matt, please, if you'll give me 20 minutes on Friday or this weekend, like I'll come to wherever you are and audition for you." So he was staying actually a couple blocks from where I live on Central Park West, and I played for him. And he said, "You have to do a formal audition, but consider yourself in." And And then I had to do a formal audition in Montreal and did that. And again, I was in love with the city. I thought he was going to be a great teacher. And that's how I ended up majoring in music. And he said the caveat is you have to major in music. I got into the business school at McGill. So I had to drop my business degree. The first day at McGill, I had to go withdraw from the business school and enroll full-time in music.
That didn't ruffle any feathers with the administration?
No.
Or do they care?
Business school is huge.
Okay.
Like they didn't even notice.
Yeah.
But then I looked at my agenda and I'm like, music history, music theory, like, come on, keyboard class. Like I was excited to study economics and all these other things. And then all of a sudden I had this curriculum that was just full of things that I really didn't want to do.
Well, but I guess you had a lot of that before. I mean, the fact that you're knowing what EBITDA is and, looking at P&L sheets and balance sheets and stuff in high school before you, even get to a college classroom, I imagine a lot of that maybe replaced the MBA or the business school type thing to when you actually started working in that arena, you were a step ahead, wouldn't you say?
My hypothesis about having a music degree, whether it's at a conservatory or within a university, actually was validated. Having that differentiated background, I found to be really, really helpful. Now, I think that if you can get, an internship in the summer, if you want to go into finance at an investment bank or, in what I ended up doing, sports marketing career in some capacity that's relevant, then you won't be, a total oddball applying for those jobs when you graduate. But music, having that music degree, first of all, I'm very grateful for the classes that I ended up taking. The music curriculum at McGill, it is a damn good conservatory. Really, really, really good. And actually, by the way, when I was with Matt in that audition at that apartment, he goes, "You're going to have to transfer to music." And he goes, "By the way, it's really hard." I was like, really hard music theory sounds terrible.
It's hard. I've gone to 3 different conservatories and taken music theory in all of them. And I remember, not that I didn't learn anything, but when I went from bachelor's to master's, I had some gap years in between. And so it took me a while to refresh on what does this mean? What does that mean? And even with ear training, if you don't pay attention, it can gloss over, and the details are important to pay attention to. So yeah, I get what you mean with music theory and with all those other classes.
I would say that I have infinitely stronger foundation on the cello, which I never would have ever imagined that these classes would contribute. But the ear training classes, as an example at McGill, were so good that I just felt so much more comfortable graduating, not spending nearly the amount of time on music and the cello, and then getting thrown into professional settings. And so yeah, I thought, Matt did a really great job setting me up to, again, be a more versatile player and independent player. And so that was really helpful. And then these classes laid a great foundation. And so, yeah, I'm super grateful, not just for the optics that the music degree, gave as I stood out as I was applying to future opportunities, but.
So it wasn't like you felt you were missing out on the MBA stuff or the business side because you felt it was such an advantage having the music perspective from their side in hiring.
I'd say I wanted to have my cake and eat it too. So
Gotcha.
I found a loophole and I got a businessy job while I was in college.
Okay.
Which led to a 10-year career in what ended up being sports marketing. So classical cello to sports marketing.
Okay.
Pivot number 1.
Yeah. And going into RedBull, I remember running into you on the street here after I moved to New York, because the last time I had seen you was at Meadowmount years and years ago. Whatever, I don't know, 2011, whenever that was. But I ran into you on the corner. I remember where it was. It was outside of that Starbucks on 66th in Amsterdam. And I was like, "What are you up to?" And you said you were working for RedBull. And so describe how that came about and what the shift was mentally for you.
Yeah, so I'd always gravitated toward adventure and action sports. I like to snowboard. I grew up skateboarding in New York City. And so I was very familiar with the brand. And I was at a house party in McGill that I almost didn't go to. my roommates, and one of which is now my co-founder at Flagship, dragged me out to this fundraiser, and there was some sort of RedBull sponsorship taking place at this fundraiser. And I asked around, to see what the deal was. And there was a guy there that had a student brand, student job. They have a job that's called student brand manager, which is a nice, fun little gig on the side if you're passive about it. And it's like being GM of a market, in this case, a campus, if you take it really, really seriously. And so I got this guy's information and something just clicked in me. I was all over this opportunity. And so long story short, I made it happen.
Like you made the audition at McGill happen.
I made the audition at McGill happen.
There's kind of a brute force aspect I see a little bit to what you do.
Exactly. Yeah. I made this opportunity happen. I had to, I had a music history exam the next day after this kind of big interview.
Gosh.
That I had to balance out, but it was a clear choice for me. So made the job happen, and everything about this brand just clicked with me, with who I am as a person, what I believe in business. And I was just so motivated to absolutely crush it at this job. And
did they give you free RedBull when you worked there?
There were so many cool perks. There were so many cool perks. But when I say GM of a campus, my role was, marketing activations on campus. You want every influential organization on campus, student government, the engineers that build F1 cars, or whatever their version of F1 cars and race those, the student media. You have to know everybody. They have to be talking about you and activating around you. And then you have, in that case, drinking age in McGill is in Montreal is 18 years old. So we had a student bar. They were locked out. RedBull was locked out for multiple years. I turned that around. Yeah. There's not for any reason other than some upstart Canadian energy drink paid the bar a lot of money to be the exclusive. So I partnered with all these people that were now kind of my opinion leaders on campus, who put pressure on the bar owners to basically say, hey, we want to do events with RedBull. You have to sell RedBull. And so that's how we got that done. And then every bodega in and around the campus, I made sure we looked perfect. And tried to make friends with the people that I was buying beer from as a college student, and open doors for our off-premise sales team. And so I just had a tremendous amount of fun with this company, and I learned that they had this grad program. I was on vacation in LA with my family. My brother and I surf. That's our favorite sport to do. And so we were on a little surf trip on the West Coast in LA and Orange County, and I realized that headquarters for RedBull North America was in Santa Monica. And so I literally walked into the office, met the receptionist, and I met the woman who's, doing all the hiring for this grad program that they had. It's like a program, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 apply. They take 20, and you can end up in
a very low acceptance rate.
Wildly low acceptance rate. I figured that being a student brand manager at McGill might be helpful. And I, fortunately, this person happened to be in the office. We hit it off right away. I applied, and I thought that they were going to put me in sales or something like that. The head of sports marketing for the East Coast had been there for 20 years. He built the skateboarding department. He built snowboarding, signed some of our most famous athletes, did some of the most, large scale events that RedBull had done in sports, saw my application as a classical cellist and said, I want some fresh blood in here. And so cello quite literally led to a career in sports marketing at, arguably one of the best sports marketing companies that exists.
That's amazing. Well, and I want to get into this more when you talk about your startup, but at the RedBull position and your whole time there, how many years were you there?
I was in a student brand manager capacity for 2 years. And then I graduated university in 2013. And my last day at RedBull to start Flagship was February 2020.
Okay. So
quite a long
7
time.
years. Yeah.
More. Yeah.
More than 7 years. So in terms of musical skills and work ethic required to attain it, what do you think you could extract from your musical training that helped you at RedBull, other than just it looks good on a resume?
There's a quote that somebody once told me, it's not what you do, but how you do it. And so when you look at it from that lens, you can start to see, how did I approach the instrument? How did I approach performing? How did I approach collaborating with musicians? Like, what are all the things that go into being excellent at something? Before I answer that question, though, because this is the most asked question I get kind of when I'm out and about, what would you think?
Really?
What would you think? What would you think if you had to guess? And no bad answers. I'm going to flip this one back to you.
Okay.
What would you guess are some skills that you've developed as a musician that you think might be applicable to the outside world?
Well, the obvious ones to me are consistency, work ethic, right? I mean, you can't. I mean, the kind of saying in my mom's Suzuki program, she has a school of 150 students, and she teaches at a college in Louisiana. The kind of Suzuki saying, which I don't know who coined this, is that only practice on the days you eat. And that's kind of like the bare minimum if you're trying to be a musician, right? You don't have to practice every day, just on the days you eat. But the reality is that, if I'm trying to be a professional musician and I'm, in high school or something, I'm doing, 30 minutes one day, 2 hours the next, 1 the next, 15 minutes the next, it's really inconsistent. And you have to kind of have a volume of work that goes into it on a consistent basis. So 1 would be consistency. 2 would be focus, like ability to sit down and do something for an hour, 2 hours, without relenting, 3 hours even. And I think apart from just going to school, a lot of people who don't have musical training, they never get that. They might have sports practices, but they never get like, I'm going to sit down and play this instrument and work on this piece and try to make progress on it for an hour, 2 hours straight. So those are the obvious ones from the musician point of view. But I'm curious, like, what are the things that I might not consider? Like, is there some kind of pattern recognition, or is there something even, interpersonally, when we play chamber music, you have to collaborate. Does that help? That's what I'm more curious about, is the things that aren't so obvious, like work ethic, consistency, focus.
I would say that all of those things I agree with, and I'm constantly discovering new ones. I'd say the one that probably comes up the most, or that's at least, it's just most obvious to me, is just performance. For sure. I think there are a lot of high pressure moments. At RedBull, once or twice a year, you'd get up in front of everybody and present a business plan. And we were owned by RedBull's an Austrian company on the global holding level. And so everybody flying from Austria, and you have HQ in LA, and you have all the other business units, and it's kind of just one moment. And so you don't want to screw that up. And when you're presenting a marketing plan, it is actually a performance. You do it if you're not passionate about what you're saying, especially in that role, even in fundraising, which is very relevant to what I'm doing now, there is such an element of performance. And I'm not saying being theatrical or,
being on, like
just being on,
having an objective,
just being on, and I think you can probably relate in this moment. This is the first episode of your podcast, right? And there are so many things that, you have process wise, there are so many elements in the preparation and live action from classical cello that go into anything new that you do. And so I'm sure you'll reflect on that and it'll be obvious to you right now, but this comes up by far the most for me. I'd say there are moments where you really need to show up and nail it. These are the defining moments. This is the meeting that can change your life. The business opportunity that'll make your year. Or even things that are meaningful in your personal life. We were just at an audition for I call it an audition. My wife was laughing at me for this. We were at an interview for my now daughter's 2's program next year.
Oh, for her school?
Yeah, there are 5 or 6 kids in the class. And the huge letdown to my wife if we don't absolutely nail this. Yeah. It's 5 to 6 kids in a class.
That's incredibly small.
And so, it just happened this morning. And so I think there's an element of figuring out what is your routine for being on? What is, obviously preparation is so much of it. You know what it's like to be prepared going on stage and what it's not like to be prepared going on stage, or prepared to a lesson or not prepared to a lesson. I think this balance of knowing what it means to be prepared, not going crazy and overdoing it, not underdoing it, that calibration is incredibly important. And then physically, how are you in your best moments? Recognizing what that is, figuring out how to tap into that as best as possible. And so I'd say, there have been so many, when you start a, company, especially, what I'm doing now, I give one example in RedBull with these, BP presentations that we did. But now there are just so many moments. I'm leading a team. I'm constantly in, fundraising environment. I'm constantly on these life-changing sales calls.
As a musician, especially, I perform fairly frequently. There'll be some months where out of 30 days, I think this past December might have been one of my busier months, but like almost every other day you have a concert, it seems. And you kind of start to get used to that feeling of being on stage. So, I did a presentation in November, which was kind of a performance mixed with a talk, kind of like a speech about some family history stuff. And it wasn't such a big deal to do the speech because, I was there with my cello. I was in kind of known territory. But for people who maybe go to business school or have an MBA and aren't used to getting up in front of, 200 people or 20 people, I could imagine that as being difficult. And getting up on stage and playing Lalo Concerto at Meadowmount, you're experiencing the same adrenaline that you're experiencing when you have these presentations to maybe board members and whatnot.
100%. If let's say I have something that I may or may not be, may be nervous for, that's big toward the end of the day. And that analogy that you gave of when you're stacked with concerts, the next concert you're not nervous for. But if you have too many concerts and you don't get to prepare for that next concert, that's also not good. So it's really that calibration, and it's a very personal thing. And so I think that's one. The second one is just, we have the lens from all the hard work that we put into of what it means to be, excellent at something. And I think that when you can take that lens, trying and failing in something else, when there's more gas in the tank. And I think you're less discouraged because you've already broke through so many of those boundaries when things aren't going well and, other things that you're trying. So that's another thing. I think that, I started playing at 2.5 very seriously from 5th grade, played very seriously throughout, until I was 21. So 5th grade to 21, there's so many times where I showed up to a lesson and 3 lessons in a row, 4 lessons in a row, you're like getting yelled at. I just cannot figure out, I can't have this breakthrough. And I think pushing through those breakthroughs, looking at those breakthroughs, figuring out hacking those breakthroughs from many, many dimensions, knowing when it's just perseverance, knowing when it's multidimensional thinking, you start to really know yourself. And it's an incredible asset to really start to master that personal relationship with mastering something.
I want to get into your startup, but just before, to bridge into that, I'm curious what it was like during the pandemic with RedBull, and was that kind of when you had this inkling of wanting to start your own business? Because how long has it been around?
I wish that was the sequence of events.
Okay.
But the real sequence of events was that I gave RedBull 4-month notice. I'd been there for a long time. I personally was terrified and didn't want to let go. I loved it so much, but I just knew I had to finally, do what I was meant to do, which is start this company. And so my last day at RedBull was February 2nd, 2020, 3 weeks before the pandemic really started. No kidding. Yeah, exactly.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
And yeah. So the timing is never perfect. For those who want to get out and start something, it's such a cliche, but just start. There's literally no perfect time. Say goodbye. Yeah. Yeah.
Surely you saw trends moving in towards the AI direction before that happened, because your business is centered around AI and retail and how I want you to kind of explain what exactly it is that the business does. But was this kind of a wave that you saw coming and you felt like you wanted to get on, or did you actually make the jump and then see what it was after the fact?
I started my company, it's called Flagship, as something completely different from what I'm doing today. It was in working with retail brands, with the first iteration of what this company was, that I discovered this major issue that formed the idea that we brought to life today. So another kind of turn of events, pivot in my life. I won't get too much into, if we have time later, then I'll elaborate on it. But essentially, you can think of Flagship as starting as a retail consultancy to solve a very specific problem. And we ended up so I started February 2020, had to approach things differently because the pandemic came right away. And by May, nothing happened between then and May, right? I quit this amazing job. I've had this bottled up dream to be, really successful entrepreneur. And, the early months of the pandemic, I wouldn't say I wasn't like pretending like the pandemic didn't exist, but I was going hard because I needed to make something work. I'd raised a little bit of capital for investors, so I felt heavy weight on my shoulders from that. Personally, felt a huge weight on my shoulders, and I needed to make this the right decision.
There goes that brute force again.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I think, I forget who said this, but it's a great quote. Don't focus on making the right decision, focus on making the decision right. And that really resonated with me, right? You're not always going to be able to you don't know what the right decision is going to be because you don't hold the cards to the future. Mm-hmm. But if you do something, then you can just make sure that that was the right decision in your life. Mm-hmm. So I really like that one. And so that's the way that I approached this. That brute force, this was literally just brute force, with little tints of luck that came, that I worked. That luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So I'd say there's a lot of preparation and couple little sparks of opportunity that came our way. And it led to us bringing a service to the market that ended up attracting some of the biggest brands in the world.
You have, I looked at your customer list, and you have True Classic, you have Oliver Cabell, it's international as well. I mean, you have, I think, is it a French company that you're working with as well? So
this is the brands that you're talking about are our current customers on this AI platform, which I'll get into. But I had my earliest customers were Moncler, Omega Watches,
an
LVMH brand.
That's huge.
Yeah. And in this kind of consulting work that we were doing. And this insight that we had around inventory planning being completely broken at brands that were quite small, all the way to these multinational corporations, these multi-billion-dollar companies, public companies. They were literally using Excel spreadsheets to plan their inventory, to figure out, they have thousands of SKUs. If you and I started a clothing company today, we wanted to create jackets and pants and shirts. We'd have collared shirts, crew neck shirts. We'd have corduroy pants, cotton pants.
Shirts with cellos on
them. We'd have so many different designs and colors and sizes. Imagine like some of the biggest brands in the world. I think Hermes has like 500,000 unique items each year. Imagine using Excel spreadsheets to try to manage all of that. The reason why brands are using Excel spreadsheets is because inventory planning is an art and a science. It's a really creative process. Do you put a cello? That's a creative decision, but there's a lot of math that goes into that. And so you can plug formulas into Excel, but you can also change any cell to be exactly what you want. I think that cello shirt is going to grow by 20%. And you can apply a color curve, which means that, like historically we've seen this many smalls relative to larges sold, et cetera. But the number of errors and inaccuracies that occur when you are planning in that way in a tool that's not meant for this, leads to major issues. And inventory has killed so many brands and been the cause of so many bankruptcies in the industry.
And is that mostly a result of insufficient inventory or incorrect inventory, like lopsided inventory, where you have too much of one product, not of another?
A lot of the time it's both. So a lot of the time you're stocking out of bestsellers and you end up with triple XLs and pink and yellow. I mean, how many times have you gone to a sale?
Oh gosh, I was just about to say, I remember this past December, I went to a shop where there were these shirts that I loved, and I was like, do you have it in a medium? I'm like, well, we only have XL. We could maybe order it, but actually no, they discontinued. There's all these things where everything I wanted, they were out of.
Yeah, it's a major
that's
issue.
The case. And like, I do feel like it never occurred to me, but now that you say it, half the time I go shopping for something, they rarely have my size.
So if they were to make sure they had your size no matter what, it's reckless because they could go bankrupt because they're trying to buy to that amount, right? If they didn't buy enough, and they definitely have. So to answer your question, a lot of the time they're in a situation where there's both, where they have too much of what they don't need and not enough of what they want. But again, when you're trying to distill down from the highest category of like my shirts or my outerwear category and get down to that medium and black for John Henry, it's incredibly difficult to do. There's no live monitoring. Excel, you have to kind of manually update the data. Formulas break, there's human error. And now that everybody's familiar with what machine, so we had this insight before ChatGPT came out. So before AI was a really big trend. And AI for everyone is, it's basically statistics with machines behind it. The simplest way to explain how ChatGPT works is, let's take the phrase cat in the hat. 99% of the time, hat is going to follow cat in the. And so ChatGPT is training on the entire World Wide Web, and they're able to figure out, most likely what is going to follow the next word. And that is how this works.
So it's just probabilities.
It's just probabilities.
And you can use that perhaps to say most likely what's going to follow this trend with the inventory.
Exactly. And is the seasonality going to persist? We also use machine learning to identify anomalies. Is this something that a human should look at because it is not forecastable, because it's not based in probability? And so what we needed to do in order to build a successful software in this space was nail that art and science balance. Not force people into this broad canvas of a tool, which is Excel, that comes with all these downsides, but build a tool where they can really, leverage in human intuition. The machine's not going to try to do things the machine shouldn't be doing. The machine will provide them with scenarios. I always like to compare it to playing blackjack. Have you ever played blackjack?
Yeah. There was a point in my life where I got really into trying to count cards.
Okay.
And I had
not surprised. Very John Henry thing to do.
I had multiple iPhone apps that would help you practice counting cards and remember what the count is. And basically the end stage for me was, I went to a casino in Shreveport. I'm from Shreveport, and we have all these casinos that I had never been to until I got into this. And basically I started doing the counting, and I was losing money and I got down to maybe $40. I can't remember what I went in with. And I realized that I was counting, I was getting just a number off each time. And I made one little twist and then started counting correctly. And then I got back up to right where I walked in with in terms of money, and I left.
You realized it wasn't for you.
I realized
you're going to stick to Jello.
Yeah.
But the blackjack analogy is that you're playing blackjack, you get a hand, it's a little iffy. You ask the dealer, what does the book say? There's a book of blackjack, which, tells you what to do probabilistically in any situation. And we're really like the blackjack book for retail planning. The reason I'm excited about this is we're all wearing clothes. Retail industry makes up a significant portion of GDP. And, in launching what was the first iteration of Flagship, I experienced firsthand across, small brands, large brands, European brands, American brands, that this was the biggest problem. And that data science was the solution.
So you encountered the AI component of your business a while after you had already been working in it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's a while after I started the company. Yeah, a couple of years after I started the company, we came across this insight and really pivoted the company, which was harder than starting a company at the start of the pandemic, I have to say.
In terms of how your AI engine. Was that the term you would use?
Algorithms, models.
Algorithms
I
work.
like to call it an engine.
An engine?
Yeah.
How did you build it? Did you have to build it from scratch, or with what's out there, were you able to kind of start from maybe kind of a basic model of something else and transform it into what you needed?
That's a really great question. There are a lot of tailwinds to starting a software company right now. You can get cloud storage for, very little dollars. It's incredibly inexpensive. You can launch a website almost instantly. You can hire people on Upwork and have teams working for you around the world. It's an incredible, incredible time. You can have AI bots selling for you, actually, and in a sophisticated way. And there were two particular tailwinds that made this business kind of ripe for today. But one of them is that, there are these core foundational models that you can then go and build hundreds of variants on that are specific to your business. And that's exactly what we do.
So could you model it for, let's say, and this is maybe jumping ahead a few questions, but let's say, you wanted to apply it to something else, another industry, you could take what you have and actually alter some of the brain work of it and turn it into something, a new business.
Yeah, exactly.
Subscription to service.
Yeah. So
right?
we just started working with this very, very cool accessories business, and our, apparel and footwear models, which we built hundreds of, applied very nicely to this. I'm sure the data science team is doing some refinements and building new models. But when we get into other categories like consumer packaged goods, CPG industry, we're going to make refinements there. I think the retail industry is huge. And like I was saying, I think it's a really, really important part of life and the economy. But, we can certainly start to take a more horizontal approach, once we hit a certain scale. And many, many companies in our space and that might have started in a vertical area like retail, it will then go on to automotive or something like that. But right now, I think retail, for all these nuanced reasons, like I was talking about, the art and science and building models that account for seasonality and really understanding your end user, even your go-to-market motion, is very particular in retail if you want to be specific. So you really have to start small with a basic unit in a company and build from there. And we really apply the scientific method to kind of getting to that next stage.
Interesting.
You have a basic unit, as simple and stripped back as possible, because you don't have many resources in a startup. So you have to keep things stupid simple, as they say, and then just constantly build off there. And in order to really make sure that you're not building a house of cards, that you're building something that is rock solid, and the term for this in startups and technology is called product market fit. In order to make sure that you're really laying down the foundation of a product market fit, you need a stack hypothesis on top of validated hypothesis. If it gets invalidated, you have to go back and start it over and over again. And these were hard lessons learned. These are things that I didn't necessarily do in the beginning that now are our greatest strengths.
Interesting. Would you say, it sounds like a little bit like trial and error. And I remember, I'm just trying to relate it to another conversation, which I heard, which was, I believe it was the Lex Friedman and Sam Altman conversation. They had a podcast together, and he was talking about product market fit as well with ChatGPT. But how much of it is like experimenting? Because it seems like with product market fit, there's a lot of advice out there to run an experiment, see if it works, like maybe A/B tests. I don't know if it's in marketing, for example. But did you feel like you had to run that kind of trial and error, or are you using kind of another method to find product market fit?
No, I think, the number one thing is work really, really, really closely with your end user or your future end user. So as much as we could, we lived with our customers. We studied the call recordings that we had with them, and we really made sure that we were truly listening to them. But you have to be careful because, you ask somebody who rides a horse, what they want, and they say a faster horse, not a car. And so you need to, I think, do things in a really structured way in order to make sure you don't fall into that trap. There's a really, really helpful product framework that my co-founder discovered called Jobs to be Done, JTBD. There are a lot of articles written on it. and a couple of books written on it. And I found that to be the most helpful framework for not falling in those traps and still kind of applying all these tests toward product market fit. So that framework was incredibly helpful. And we actually spent, a few months just doing that before laying on any lines of code.
And in terms of the coding, I mean, I know you said you have a team. How many people are in, I mean, if you can say, how many people are involved in just the sort of brain, the AI component of your business?
Yeah, so we're a team of 15 people. I would say 12 are technical. And then, the other 3 are very, 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 very involved in the product. And, communicating that product to customers and investors and everybody else that we're constantly engaging with. I would say on the data science team, we have 3.5 people focused on that all the time. And then, the rest are engineers and yes, that's the general breakdown. So data science is doing modeling, engineering is doing some data engineering work, but really, really focused on the back end and front end software build of what we're doing. And then we have people, designing the actual interface of the software that the front end developers then encode.
I don't know how much you personally, I mean, I'm sure you personally oversee how this turns out, like the end result, but your website is gorgeous. Going to your website, which
wait for the next version.
Do you mind giving the HTML for people if they want to visit it? The .com.
That was Upwork. FlagshipRTL.com.
FlagshipRTL.com.
Yeah. What's interesting is you're mentioning AI as this big trend. I intentionally don't use AI on any of our marketing materials. I just think that people's eyes gloss at this point, or they must, right? It's just everywhere. It's so overused. Or when you become a customer, then you finally go to flagshipai.com, and that's your gateway to kind of that world of machine learning. But we very, very intentionally did not want to use that as our front-facing URL.
I get that. It's true. I mean, you can't open the news today without seeing something about AI happening. I think you're right. It's almost, I personally wonder if, there's I know there was the .com boom, and you wonder, well, is there an AI boom? But I think the difference, which has been pointed out to me by people who I know in the business industry who seem to know what they're talking about, and I'd be curious to know your thoughts about it, is that with the .com boom, there was kind of this promise of result or promise of reward, or this kind of big scaling up with the internet, but without the actual infrastructure to make something come about, without the actual profit coming
without
from
the
it.
Actual need or business use case.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
you're saying the infrastructure was there, but it was just fugazi, and there were a lot of websites going out that were never going to be profitable.
Anything with
were
the
not viable.
basically,
Anything with there's the hype, and there's certain. So I think you're getting to,
Versus
is that the case now?
AI, there's actual real use case, and your business is living proof of that. It's benefiting big companies.
100%. I mean, I think you need to look at everything from a first principles perspective. NVIDIA, of course that stock is hyped. Of course. Yeah. But they also have a tremendous amount of backlog for their GPUs. So just try to get a sense for what the demand is. Are they going to be able to, service that demand before somebody else comes in? Do they have such a moat that nobody will be able to come in for many, many years, so they will catch up to that demand? Is their stock price and forward earnings warranted given what their demand is going to be? So I just try to take, I look at everything in an incredibly sober light. There are certainly companies getting funded with valuations that are hyped. Valuations, companies that are formed and getting valued or even used at all just because people are trying to adopt and use some AI. There are rules being created within companies to just force AI and shove it into the company. There's certainly a lot of bloat. But to your point, people are reporting in the, financial services industry, in healthcare, in sales, tremendous efficiencies. So I think that there's that rising tide.
Could you give an example, say with one of your companies, without even having to say a name, but of how it contributed to helping their problem with inventory? Because I mean, if that's obviously what it's meant for, then and they're sticking around as clients, then obviously it's working. So I'm curious to know.
I'll give you one that is very simple and that people might not think about. When you walked into that store and they were stocked out, that is demand that wasn't realized. So let's say that brand ends up just ordering the same amount that they did last year, because why would they think that sales should increase? Like, they sold the same amount, they sold an amount last year. They don't know that you were a potential customer. They're going to order the same amount that they did last time because they didn't realize that there was more demand, and they're going to be out of stock again, and the problem is going to persist. So one of the things that we use machine learning for is demand interpolation, where we can examine all these different factors and then looked at the number of stocked out days for a certain product, and then cascade that demand that was missed into the next season or next year's projections. And so that's one way. Right now, somebody would need to go into every single day and try to come up with some formula for how to attribute the lost sales days and cascade that into their.
And we say cascade that for us musicians. Is that rolling over?
Roll that forward, correct?
Roll it forward. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And so the AI component is using, probability in terms of like by the day, by the week, or is it seasonal? How does that? Is there like a primary focus where you're focused on quarters or months or certain time periods? Like,
great question. Yeah.
The smallest unit of measurement.
So we look at everything by SKU by day. Okay. And then when you're doing forecasts at higher levels, so let's say you're looking at SKU and then you go to, style, color, and then you go, to a category, et cetera. Some people want to engage at forecasts at different levels, and different time periods and different levels will get different accuracy scores. And so we might recommend to a customer saying, hey, we're getting the most accurate forecasts when we do back testing on a monthly basis. So you might be compelled to try to look at them and adjust things on a weekly basis because things are changing all the time. But the best way to engage with the statistical probability that we've given you is by looking at the monthly forecast and kind of locking that in and not trying to change that. So it's just a game of statistics. And I think back to kind of building this kind of business with no prior background in machine learning, it's kind of just asking questions and trying to leverage common sense.
I wanted to ask you actually how important, not knowing, I didn't know this when I was thinking about the question before, but when you mentioned these internships or these summer programs where you could work on Wall Street in high school, how important would an MBA be to you had you not done that? Do you think it's like this crucial thing, or would it even served you more like after music school to jump into an MBA? Because you know everything cold. With all the business elements, the vocab, obviously you're running a company and you started it and you're the leader. And so you have to know everything. But how long did that take, like from starting in RedBull to when you actually left?
Yeah, I'll kind of not say this is advice for any individual person, but just kind of speaking from my own experience, I think if I was going to go do something incredibly specialized, like being a programmer, right? I could either do a boot camp on my own or go get a CS, computer science degree. And, I think there are certain things that you would do professionally, like obviously medical being the biggest extreme, or lawyer. I think if you're going to do something incredibly specialized, then it's really, really helpful. I think that if you don't feel ready to get thrown into a business environment, and you want to go into business and be a generalist, then business school could be helpful. I think that if you have the confidence to go into an environment and you can figure out an opportunity, again, opportunities are hard to come by, and they'll be a little bit more obvious if you go to business school as a stepping stone from conservatory. But if you're confident in and willing to just take, by confident, I mean just willing to go out and do it, not, necessarily on a high horse about what your skills are, then you can figure out how to get your foot in the door, then I don't think you necessarily need to go to business school. People that I talk to mostly say that it was for networking. lucky to grow up in New York City. And yeah, one of the benefits was that I was just always around people and comfortable talking to people, and could be, in a million places in one day and meet an insane amount of people. And so, fortunately, networking was something that, came naturally and was an opportunity just based on where I lived.
Is there a recent breakthrough or say development or trend that you're seeing in your space or in the AI space that has you very optimistic about the future of that industry? Or is there anything that scares you? Kind of two-part question.
I'm generally not scared about technologies. I mean, people are normally scared in two areas. One is this going to take my job? And two, is this going to actually become dangerous? The first one, is it going to take my job? Every major technological shift displaced some workers, ended up creating more jobs. And there are countless examples of that. So
printing press,
yeah.
Farmers who what do you call those big machines that can row crops by the thousands instead of needing hundreds of people to do it?
Exactly.
Industrial revolution.
Yeah. Jobs are created in other areas. And Jamie Dimon said this in an interview, don't be afraid about, AI taking your job, be afraid about people who know how to use AI taking your job. So just, as best as you can, stay on top of what the tools are and leverage them to your best capabilities. And I'm finding that efficiency that, the Deloittes of the world are talking about getting in their workers. Imagine doing accounting work without AI, versus with AI. It's an insane amount of hours. It's just rows of data and matching things up. And
if you had to guess the work that your engine, let's say, is doing, how many people would it take to replace that from just a human capital point of view? Would it be thousands?
It's really, really hard to say. It depends on
doing...
how many products the brand has, but there's probably some sort of a ratio there. And then there are just certain things that you can't do with, certain tools. You're not going to project as well on a mini cello versus, the beautiful full-size cello that you have. You need to have the right tools in order to accomplish certain outcomes. But I'm sure there is some ratio in terms of time efficiency, accuracy. I don't know if, an insane amount of humans could catch up if the data set was so large.
Interesting.
So yeah, I'm optimistic about kind of just that job creation piece of it. And then, are there things to be afraid of? Yeah, I think that this is a technology that is out in the wild and genie's out of the bottle. And there are infinite things that could happen that are, will be positive and negative. But I'm not scared.
The next topic I want to ask you about is fundraising, because your company, you've raised something like to the tune of $13 million for this company. And that's a massive accomplishment in and of itself. Obviously, there is a huge amount of merit behind it because of what your company's offering and because of the clients you have. But I'm curious, going back to the performance aspect that you were talking about of being a musician, but also being in business, what was that like, that process of raising all this money, and how long did it take?
It's actually another really, really good music analogy that I probably haven't thought of. So the performance element that I mentioned is a big factor. When you're identifying, the best musician, it's a combination of musicality, of a particular tone, of doing things that stand out and are different, of being flawless in a way technically, but still having some imperfect quality that makes them unique. I don't know. It's just this incredible mix, but when you hear them, and there are different flavors of this. There's a little bit messy Horowitz. There is, very quirky Gould. There are just so many examples of these like really standout musicians. And I think it's very analogous to kind of a venture capitalist experience of founders, where there's a baseline of what needs to check the box. Like they need to be technical. They're just technical check, musicality check, excitement, Yuja Wang check, whatever that is. And they might index higher in certain areas. And they might be better at certain things. Some might be sales and marketing, aka musical.
Are you referring to culture index?
Huh?
Are you referring to culture index? Like these kind of personality tests that examine where your best spot is in a company?
Oh, you're talking about like Myers-Briggs and stuff like that.
Yeah. Or I've also heard of like there's culture index.
Yeah.
That is a different style of test, but some people maybe lean more in detail and others are less detailed.
Yeah, the most common one that I've seen in the startup landscape is Myers-Briggs. A lot of co-founders will take it, and teams will take it, and leadership teams will take it, and they'll do it before offsites. And I think it is helpful. It usually reinforces things that you've already had a hunch of or that you already know. But yes, but there is. So yes, you want to find people that are the best in the world at something, and that just have this quality. And VCs feel that when there's so many meetings, and you might come across so many musicians. But back to our Meadowmount days, I've told you this, and you always blush. But I just remember you playing that Kabalevsky's second concerto, right?
Yep.
Is a lesser known one, and something really, really coming through. And there's something really unique about your playing that makes you stand out. And so that's what VC saw in Travis Kalanick. And I'm not going to go on a rant of comparing musicians to founders.
Well, no, it's interesting.
I don't want to insult anyone. Who's Adam Newman?
Well, it's interesting because you're right. In music, one of the things that makes it so interesting is that, you can go and play Lalo Concerto or Dvorak Concerto, and you can hear 1,000 different interpretations of it depending on who's playing. And some of them are like, it's almost like a totally different piece. Whereas some, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard this before. It sounds like everything I'm expecting. But I guess with business and with VCs and startups, it's like every business is in some way a new business. It's not like you're playing, Beethoven's Third Cello Sonata for the 14th time. There's some new twist, some new angle, and you also have backgrounds of these people who I'm sure they come from all over the globe, but also have different backgrounds where they're not necessarily just musicians. They might have been athletes. They might have been a gymnast or something. So in your case, comparing you to say a performer out on stage, what was the process for, say, approaching people, and how did you prepare for that when you were raising all this money?
I think, again, you need to have the fundamentals down. And I've really gone through the pain of not having the fundamentals down and failing miserably at fundraising. So you really need to have the fundamentals down. That whole kind of stacking of product market fit in the early days of a startup is incredibly important. Once we really stacked enough of those layers, that's, we hit a certain point, then everything changed. So there's kind of just making sure that you do the work, and you do it thoughtfully and you do it scientifically. Really, it is a science in getting to that baseline. And I think there are a lot of parallels to that with music and sound and vibrato. There is a lot of science to it. But once you get all of that together, again, the odds that I told you of that graduate program at RedBull, the odds of getting funded from a top VC are so slim. They have to be smaller. I'm actually curious to know what that ratio is, but it is insane. There are some firms that do 5 deals a year. It's so that standout quality that you go to Carnegie Hall and see, or you hear in a studio class or something like that, where just everything comes together and there's something indescribable and special that is really, really compelling. In the end, people are human, and they're, investing as humans, and they're, running companies as humans. And so, I'd say the most helpful thing for other people is to talk about all the science that goes into it, right? Because you can't just be a charismatic person and succeed in a fundraising environment. But it's really those two sides of the coin.
What advice would you give someone who is in a position that you felt you were in towards the end of your time in McGill, where they're a musician, but not everyone who goes to a conservatory is going to end up being a performing musician their whole life. It's just it's not always something that people are trying to do as a lifelong career. They realize partway through that they want to pivot and do something else. But B, just statistically, whether it's orchestra jobs, whether it's teaching positions, in many cases there just aren't enough spots to there are too many. There's too great of a demand of student for the spots that are available, and so people will transition to something else in the musical field or outside of it. But what advice would you give to someone who's looking to start their own business, who has this musical background, in order to make it successful, in order to overcome that kind of bridge?
I'd say definitely do that self-discovery first and figure out what you love and what you're great at. I'd say there's a 4-box quadrant, and on the top right is what you love and what you're great at. And then, on the bottom left, you have what you suck and what you hate, and kind of everything in between. And really, I would say do that exercise and then use that as a guide for what you end up pursuing. Because there's a book that was handed to me when I first started at RedBull called Strengths Finders. And you can check it out. There's an assessment that you can do. But the whole philosophy is that if you double down on your strengths, you're going to see exponential growth in return versus trying to refine your weaknesses. So if you want tailwinds and not headwinds, then focus on what you love and what you're great at, and you'll have the fastest path,
Interesting.
kind of toward driving to whatever your goal is coming out of music.
That seems counterintuitive, because as a musician, we're told in lessons, oh, you need to work on your 4th finger vibrato, or there's this thing with your bow. So it's this a weakness that's an obvious thing you need to overcome. But no one ever says, oh, you have great uppo staccato, work on your uppo staccato more, right? So it seems a little counterintuitive from a musical
It's a great point. Like I said, you kind of need to check the box to a certain degree. Like if you're playing a line and every time you hit your 4th finger, your note dies down. But Django Reinhardt, lost some fingers in a fire or something. Django Reinhardt is a gypsy jazz guitar player. I love gypsy jazz. I've actually learned guitar just so I could play some of this music.
Really? Wow.
And anyway, he played everything on 2 fingers. And he's one of the most 2 or 3 fingers. And he was one of the most virtuosic players ever. So there are hacks, right? If you really want to do that.
Brute force.
I guess that's the theme. So yeah, one that's kind of step number 1. Number 2 is, I think it really doesn't hurt to go to a place where you can learn the ropes. If you want to eventually start your own business, I think it's totally fair to want to go to a place where you think that they're doing it best, and learn within that organization. If you have the patience, which you'll need if you're going to start a business anyway, I highly recommend it. You'll build a network that way, and you'll learn from osmosis from the people that are there. Companies are really hard because you're learning things. You have to learn things and figure things out while execute. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to manage when you're starting a business, and starting from scratch. It's to be honest, just very challenging. So I'd say the safest path is to do that. And then, you'll maybe have met somebody that you want to start the business with. I think there's statistics that show that starting a business with a co-founder is more likely for success.
Really?
Yeah. You find somebody who loves something else and is great at something else and really complements you. And then from there, scientific method. Don't just say, I have this problem, other people are going to have the problem. Or I heard this person had this problem, I'm going to go build this. And then you realize that nobody actually wants the product that you're building or service that you're offering. So those are the three steps, I'd say. And you can skip number 2 if you are really compelled to do so.
So with such a busy schedule, running a company, being a founder, being a parent, you've had your first kid this past year. How old?
We had her May of 23.
Okay.
Yeah, so she's almost 20 months.
Amazing. How do you maintain your cello skills? Because we've played concerts together and you play great. We played Bach Chaconne and you play the hard part, playing up there in the violin sphere. Is that something that just since you put in the time, it's there, or do you actively maintain this?
No, I'd say foundation really helped. And then just being forced to do the smart practicing that is hard to force yourself to do when you're actually playing full time. Other thing is narrow repertoire that I just make sure that I nail, and then picking very challenging repertoire that there's no in between. Do I have to practice this or not? And always having that on the books. So those are a couple of my hacks. Also practice with a drone, and that really, really helps with intonation. And constantly taking tips from my friends and then playing with the great musicians that I know to keep me sharp. But I have never said no to a performance because of difficulty. I always figure out a way to make it work. And knowing that anything like that could come, or that I'm going to set myself up for something really, really challenging, I think has been a contributing factor for sure.
So the lesson for the musician is always take the gig.
Always take the gig that's going to challenge you. Yeah, for sure. The other thing is on the other side of the coin is I don't overcommit from just a volume. I'd say on average, I perform once a month, and it's been the perfect amount. And some of those things I really need to prepare for. The Chaconne was not an easy one, of course. And they're just did Rossini Duo with Ramin, as I mentioned earlier, at Weil. And there's some technical spots there. So it's a good mix, but once a month has been amazing. And everybody in my life, and everybody professionally knows that this is a part of what I do. And so when rehearsals pop up on my calendar or their performances, everybody's understanding and excited. And actually when I was at RedBull, and what started these arena gigs was the head of marketing for the New York soccer team was actually one of the managers in the Montreal office where I started, and knew that I was a cellist and asked if I'd play the national anthem at the New York Red Bulls game. And so we played at an arena, and NBC caught wind of what we were doing. They normally don't broadcast the anthem, but they ended up broadcasting our anthem because it was just different and unique.
That's cool.
People sent letters in saying it was so moving to have strings play. And then it ended up leading to Knicks games, Rangers games, Clippers on the West Coast. And then we get to invite now clients of ours to these games. And it's just such a cool thing.
That's
fun.
And
it's so fun to do with Ramin.
Now that you've gone through this big career trajectory with 2 different pivot points, massive pivot points, what does music mean to you at this stage in your life as someone who runs a business, who's a father and a husband, and is responsible for a lot outside of music? What does music, what role does it play in your life at this point?
I would say that almost every feeling I have toward music is at its peak now. It's the best that it's ever been. And I think it keeps getting better. It's a way that I do really cool things with my brother. It's a way that I stand out in everything that I do day to day, work and personally. It is a very, very personal escape for me if I want to tap into this world where I've invested more than 30 years of my life training and get back on that treadmill and go high speed with Haydn D or low speed with any
Bach Sarabande.
Any of these Bach Sarabande or any of these tearjerkers.
Papa Requiem.
Like we did. Yeah.
We played with your brother on double bass, the Papa Requiem for 3 cellos, but for 2 cellos and double bass. That was
Yeah.
one of the most unique Papa Requiems I've ever been a part of, and it was so beautiful.
Yeah, it really came together. I love that. Yeah, so I'd say, and then I go and engage. I'm so lucky that I have this deep training and I can appreciate every form of music that I hear outside on one of the deepest levels. So I'm constantly at Lincoln Center, getting to see my friends too, which is really, really cool. So yeah, it's a lot of dimensions to it, but so beyond grateful. I almost quit. I told you this story before, but started at 2.5, kicking and screaming all throughout 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think at 7, my parents were like, you know what? If you want to go quit, just go tell the music director. And I walked in and walked out. I couldn't do it. Tail between my legs. It was my identity at that point, which is fair. I was, done it literally my entire life, as long as I could remember. I don't remember not playing cello. And everybody was telling me, you're going to thank your parents for this later. And I thank my parents, and I'm really, really grateful.
Last question, and it's actually a new tradition and I'd like to start for this podcast. If you had to pick a question for the audience, an audience member who may be listening, whether it's a musician, music lover, a parent of a musician, of a young person who's trying to start their kids on an instrument, anyone, based off our conversation, what question might you ask them to ponder, something for them to think about and kind of ponder as they have listened to this and as they go throughout their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that 4-quadrant exercise that I mentioned earlier, where, in the top right, you have what you love and what you're great at. And, on the bottom left, you have what you're terrible at and what you don't like. And the other 2 boxes, you have what you like, but what you're not great at. And I think if you do that exercise, it could really, really unlock things, certainly for musicians, and anybody in the professional world, or anybody wanting to go from professional to music or music to professional. I think anybody in life, it's a really, really important thing to explore, and a way to tap into major, major exponential growth. And so that would be the one. I found that to be most helpful in kind of writing my own constitution for how I live my life.
Justin, you've been an amazing first guest, really a dream guest. Thank you so much for being here. I've learned so much, and I hope everyone else has too.
Thanks. It was good to spend time with you. See ya. Thanks, guys.